Morty, I mean, how do you keep such a sunny disposition in this rotten, stink-infested world?
You mean, what do I do when I see Mr. Blues peeking around the corner?
God, even has a cute name for depression.
Well, I just close my eyes and I think a happy thought. Here, I'll show you.
What was your thought?
I'm glad I'm not you.
That was the cold open from the A House Is Not a Home episode of Cheers, written by today's guest, Phoef Sutton. Hello and welcome to Season 2 of the Occasional Film Podcast, the occasional companion podcast to the Fast, Cheap Movie Thoughts blog. I'm the blog's editor, John Gaspard. In today's episode, I have a terrific conversation with TV writer Phoef Sutton. In our chat, he discusses his transition into TV writing and emphasizes how understanding actors' voices and cadences helped him to write effectively for shows like Cheers. He also highlights the collaborative nature of the writer's room and the importance of being adaptable to feedback and different storytelling approaches. But before we got into all that, I asked Phoef about his original goal. Was it acting or writing? I understand that you wrote and acted in plays in high school and in college. Was that always the goal, to be a writer, or was acting a goal?
Well, yeah, acting was a goal. I when I came out here, I sort of thought I wanted to be a writer or an actor, and I decided I could only take getting rejected in one field at a time. And I thought getting rejected as a writer was more pleasant because you don't do it to your face. I just didn't get any traction as an actor. So I'm really glad that I did it when I did it, because it's very helpful for a screenwriter, television writer to have acted, to have known what it's like to be on the stage and to have to say the words. I can communicate with actors, I think, a little bit better than a lot of other showrunners who've just been writers, because I know what it's like. I can understand that. And also, I think I learned, maybe from being an actor or being around actors, I learned how to write for particular people. I mean, when I know a person and I know their voice and I know what they feel, I could write for Treat Williams, I could write for Bob Newhart, I could write for Brian Dennehy. They have different cadences, different ways of speaking. Ted Danson, Kelsey Grammer, Woody Harrelson, and I was able to do that. So that stood me in good stead. And also being a playwright, I mean, there aren't very, very many writers who start as playwrights nowadays, I think, just because there isn't really much theater in this country, or at least not in this city anyway. And I was in plays I wrote too. So, I mean, there you have nobody to blame but yourself, You can't say, who wrote this shit, or that actor screwed it up. And the first thing that I did professionally, aside from some plays in regional theaters where I got paid, a stipend, was Cheers. And that was basically a play, the entrances, exits, one set, all that. And all the actors were theater actors. It was a play. So they do stage plays of various sitcoms over the years. I've done, I don't know, The Golden Girls and all that. And I'm surprised they haven't done one of Cheers, because it's a play. And that set, that beautiful set, which was designed by Richard Silbert, who did Chinatown and all sorts of other movies, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. It was a beautiful set. It was a beautiful set. So many episodes of Cheers were just on the set. I mean, we're just on the bar, never left the bar, never even changed days, because we found that when we film in front of an audience, on Tuesday nights, and we film pretty much the whole thing in front of an audience. And we found that this was later on in the run, we found that when we would have them change their costumes to be a day later, you could never get them back. They would go to the dressing rooms, they would start playing foosball, smoking pot, and you could never get them back. So there are plenty of episodes of Cheers that take place in one day that couldn't possibly have taken place in one day, but we just figured we don't want to do the costume changes.
Yeah, I remember hearing an interview with Jim Burrows where he talked about Norm's entrance in the pilot, and he said he felt bad for the writers because in the blocking, he put Norm at the far end of the bar, which meant every time Norm came in, you guys needed to write joke to get him across the room.
Yeah.
And it became, I don't know if it was ever a hassle for you, but it's like, well, okay, we got to deal with the Norm joke.
Well, it was one of the trademarks of the show, and so it was good in that sense. But yeah, and everyone had to top the one before. At first, they were very simple jokes, but then they had to be, very complex jokes or philosophical jokes. We would go to great lengths not to have Norm enter because we would have Norm there at the beginning of the show because we didn't want to deal with it. Well, I wanted to do an episode where they put in a new parking meter in front of the place, so he had to constantly go and feed the meter, so there would be like 10 Norm entrances in it, and people wanted to kill me for suggesting that.
Let's just back up real quick here. I want to talk about your playwriting first, because I know you had sort of a learning experience. You got an understanding of how the business works with your play Burial Customs and how things look like they're going to happen and then they don't happen.
I was just out of graduate school at the University of Florida, and I moved to New York for a brief period of time. I couldn't really get in, couldn't get an apartment, couldn't get a job. But there was a brief period of time when Ulu Grossbart, who was a big director, wanted to direct that play. And it was very exciting. And, if I'd known more about the business, I would have been more excited because, he'd just done Crimes of the Heart, I think, on Broadway. And he was really, really big. And he was really into the play. And I went to his office on, I don't know, on Times Square or something like that. I don't know where it was, but I felt like I was a part of the Broadway scene. And then he just sort of lost interest and it went away. And that sort of thing happens over and over and over again with people in the business. Even if you're very successful, there are millions of times when things look like they're going to be great and then they fall apart. And my initial reaction to that was to say, I'm not going to get excited about anything until it's real, until it's really happening. So that if I sold a script, a pilot script, I wouldn't get excited until they agreed to make the pilot. And then when he did the pilot, I wouldn't get excited until it was on the air. And then when it was on the air, I wouldn't get excited until it lasted. And then I realized that I was putting myself in a position where I never got excited about anything. So then I changed my attitude to get excited about every little victory that comes on. I was right to be excited about Udo Grossbart doing the play. It was a wonderful opportunity. It didn't pan out. There was nothing wrong with being excited. You aren't punished for being excited about something that doesn't come to the ultimate conclusion. I mean, even when we won our Emmys for Cheers, I basically wouldn't be excited because I would think, well, we got to go back to tomorrow and do it again and all that. So now I allow myself to be excited about things.
That's a very good lesson to learn, I think. Find that balance.
A hard lesson to learn.
It is. So what happened out of playwriting that got you into TV writing? What was that connection?
Well, I mean, I wanted to write for movies. I wanted to write for movies, and I wanted to write for television. I wanted to write for theater, and I wanted to write books. I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a writer, one form or another. So as I said, I couldn't get into New York. I couldn't get a job, couldn't get an apartment. And in LA, I had a relative that I could stay with. And my brother was with the Crown Books chain, so I knew I could get a clerk job at a Crown bookstore. So I knew I could get a job. So I moved to LA with my then fiance. And I just wrote plays, wrote screenplays. I had a friend from college, Barbara Hall, who was on Newhart at the time. She's since got on to do everything. She did Madam Secretary and I'll Fly Away and all that. And she told me, well, if you want to write for television, which I did, among other things, because I watched the Dick Van Dyke Show when I was a kid. And I sort of thought that was what being a writer was like. So I wrote a spec Newhart because she was on Newhart. And that was what got me the freelance Cheers job. And I didn't know anything about writing for television. I didn't know anything about writing with a group, writing with a room. I was a very private writer, very, just wrote by myself, didn't talk to anybody about what I was writing until it was done. So I had to learn all that stuff. I had to learn how to pitch. I had to learn how to pitch in the room during the rewrites. It was my graduate school was Cheers. And it was a good graduate school because obviously there were the best writers in the business on that show.
So you were learning from some really, really good people.
Absolutely. And it was very tense. It was very stressful. It was a hard room.
Why was it hard?
Well, because you had to be funny, you had to be good, you had to say the right thing, you had to do it. I mean, there were long silences in the room where people were thinking and crafting and doing stuff, and trying to do it. I didn't speak for the first, 6 months in the room, I think. And I think that was probably a good choice because the year I joined the staff, two other writers joined the staff too. And I was the only one who made it all the way through the year. They were both let go. And I think part of the reason was that I knew my place. I didn't talk first, and then I would try a few jokes and they got laughs. I would try a few more jokes and they would get laughs. And then before you know it, you're doing it and you're just in the zone. It's a difficult thing to describe.
Were you breaking stories as a group?
Yeah, oh yeah. Every story on that show was broken as a group. We never came in with a story. I mean, at the beginning of each season, Glenn and Les would come in and we would talk about what to do, and it was very clear that they hadn't thought about it for an instant over the break, and everything was, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And nobody, no freelancer, no staff writer, no producer, nobody ever came in and said, I've got a story, and pitched it. Everything was pitched in the room. And when a story is being pitched and formed and all that sort of thing, at some point in the early stages, you would get assigned it, or another writer would get assigned it and all that, and you would have to, okay, I got to do this. I got to do this. That was the way it worked. Yeah.
What did you learn about story in that process?
Well, I mean, you learned everything. Obviously the stories for a sitcom, particularly a sitcom like Cheers, are fairly simple. There's a problem that's presented. Halfway through, it takes a turn, and then it's resolved. And usually, for the first 5 years of the show, it getting resolved involved something to do with Diane, because she was pivotal. But I think what I learned was that when you're first a writer, and you write something and it's good, it's bad, whatever, you generally think, well, that's it. That's what it is. And I can't come up with anything else, that's what it is. And when people, give you notes or object to it, you resist the notes. And the main reason you resist the notes, I think, is that you can't think how to change it. You can't figure out anything different. And I just learned very early on that there's always a different way to do something. Anything. Nothing is perfect. Everything is always a different way to go. There's always a different way to look at it, always a different approach to take to it. And maybe that approach won't be better. Maybe it'll be a linear move. Maybe it'll be worse. On Cheers, it was almost always better. It almost always got better. I'd say it always got better in the room.
Cheers is well known for, unlike other series where major cast members left, you guys handled it better than anyone ever. Do you have any idea what was the magic powder that made it work where you guys did it?
Well, I mean, there were a couple of things. First of all, the cast always changed. The cast was always changing. It was never the same. I mean, there were the people who were replaced, left and were replaced, but there was also the people who came in. Frasier, Lilith. One of the reasons the show lasted as long as it did was that if you were writing year 8, it was a way different show from when we were writing year 3. Very different cast. I'd say the biggest thing that I learned, and I got to do this because on Chesapeake Shores, we lost the star of the show too, and I had to replace him, was just to make the character as different as possible from the one you're replacing, so that nobody thinks, oh, this guy isn't as good as that guy, or this girl is not the same thing as that. When Coach died and they brought in Woody, there was still the dumb aspect of him, but in general, he was a very different character. He was a young character. He was a naive character. He was from Midwest, whereas, Coach had been, from Sam's Life, and he was a ball player, and he was, kind of old and kind of brain damaged from getting hit in the head with balls. And that they were very different. When Rebecca came in, they made her completely different character. And one of the reasons they were able to do that was, I think, just luck, because they had the character of Frasier. Because so much of the show was the intellectual versus the blue collar type people, and Frasier was able to take that on. He had already taken it on from Diane, but he was able to take that on entirely. So the new character didn't have to be a intellectual type, snobby type. She could be what was originally intended to be a hard-nosed businessman who would clash with Sam. It didn't actually turn out that way. She turned out to be more of a basket case. But that was because of the actress and playing to the actress's strengths. character. And that I think is the main thing I learned from that. It was doing the new character. Because really, when Diane left the show had been on for 5 years, which is the run of most shows. No show had really survived the loss of its star. And she was the star. I mean, she was the pivotal point of every episode. She was the one the audience was coming in to the bar and seeing it through her eyes, all that. I mean, Ted was, certainly the co-star, but she was really the focal point of the show. So when she left, we were really scared. We did not know whether it was going to work. And the show shifted then, because it became much more of an ensemble show, because Kirsty, although she was a wonderful actress, she wasn't quite the dominant force that Shelley Long had been. That the show really became about Sam and the bar. I mean, it had been moving that way already, but it became that way. And if you were to describe the show when it first started, it would surely have been, it's a love story between Sam and Diane, and will they get together or not? And then it became a show about a bar, about the patrons of a bar and their lives.
I think there's a really good lesson in your story about the first year on Cheers, where you didn't say much and you just absorbed.
I think everyone in the world, we would be greatly improved if people didn't say so much. People talk way too much. There's that old saying, I don't know who said it, and Mark Twain or whatever, better to be silent and thought a fool than to speak up and prove it. Just don't talk. Just take it in. Be the strong silent type.
Thanks to Phoef Sutton for chatting with me today. You'll find a longer version of this interview in my book, The Popcorn Principles Strike Back, interviews with screenwriters who also write novels. Did you enjoy this interview? You can find lots more just like it on the Fast Cheap Movie Thoughts blog. Check out the link in the show notes. Plus, more interviews can be found in my books, Fast, Cheap, and Under Control, Lessons Learned from the Greatest Low-Budget Movies of All Time, and its companion book of interviews with screenwriters called Fast, Cheap, and Written That Way. Both books can be found wherever you buy your books. And while you're there, check out my mystery series of novels about magician Eli Marks and the scrapes he gets into. The entire series, starting with The Ambitious Card, can be found in paperback, hardcover, ebook, and audiobook formats. And if you haven't done it already, check out the podcast companion to those books, Behind the Page, the Eli Marks Podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts. Well, that's it for episode 203 of the Occasional Film Podcast, which was produced at Grass Lake Studios. Original music composed and performed by the one and only Andy Morantz. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you occasionally.